Welcome back, everyone. So for this morning sessions, everything has been up on the board, and I noticed people have been writing furiously, taking notes. But Patricia, during the break, has arranged with the Secretariat here to have a printout of all the text on the PowerPoint for the two sessions.
So
you will receive that today.
Yeah. And the same for the second session. So
your pen can relax now, and you can write down your own thoughts, but you don't need to copy everything on the board because we're now going to get that in printed form. Just another little announcement in case I forget at the end. Chris, who is our photographer in residence as well as many other things, said we weren't smiling sufficiently. So at the end of this session, we'll all line up again. And if you don't smile, we're going to do it again tomorrow. So now we have Patricia on Passion Prayer experiences and easy way in.
Right, okay. Thank you. I'm sorry you've got me a second time, but anyway, it is what it is. So we're going to look at, obviously, what we did first thing this morning was really what can be used in any general situation, actually. But we're now moving into something that is more specifically Passionist. And I mean, I've called it an easy way in because I've got this thing about it being the easiest possible means. Yeah. So just to start to imagine, like, what a group that might be meeting. And of course, my imagination is amazing because I'm expecting 10, 11, 12, 13 groups to meet. I'm not expecting that there's a little wee holy huddle in a corner. You know, like, actually, I have an expectation that would be like almost like small Christian community experience together. Right, okay. So Passion Prayer experiences. And of course, the classic Passionist prayer is at the foot of the cross. So that's kind of like the primary way of praying, isn't it? At the foot of the cross. And you know, we use different images. This is quite a traditional image that might speak to some people. There's Mary at the foot of the cross. There's something that's a much more modern kind of evangelical image of being at the foot of the cross. But the prayer is basically about being there, placing myself there, or as St. Ignatius would say, being in the scene, imagining that you are there. And this relates, I think, with regard to prayer leaders around the power of imagery and images. It is just a fact now in the culture that we are living in, and it was brought up a few days ago, that images often speak more loudly than words. But in fact, you know, when you go back to the Middle Ages, we've been to Durham Cathedral, some have been here, I'm sure. Not all of you have had a chance to visit it, but in Durham, when you go in now, the walls are kind of, you can see the stone, yeah? But when in the Middle Ages, you'd have walked in and the walls would have been full of images, which were teaching about scenes in the Gospels. And the average person would have learnt through that, not through book, but through images. So I think in some regards we're a wee bit back to that. But images often speak much more loudly to people than words. And here's another thing that I'd like you to consider, and I think it is important. Modern people find it quite hard to imagine. And I know it's a sweeping statement. Yeah. But because we're on the internet and we are constantly bombarded from the outside with images, then we've kind of lost that first instance ability to imagine for ourselves. Okay, so images, important. And that means then, you know, this idea of really being at the foot of the cross, to really be there, we do have to imagine it. We do have to imagine it. And that's really what Ignatius would have called imaginative contemplation, imagining you are there. So it's almost like that in Passionist prayer, you kind of circumvent other stages of prayer, and you're right at the stage of imaginative contemplation immediately. But imagery from outside can also act as a springboard towards being there. So I'm going to maybe look at some images that might do that for us. Thank you, Margot.
Oh, thanks.
You might have heard of the Scottish painter Craigie Aitchison. So I'm just going to talk about him for a wee minute. Craigie Aitchison, Scottish, went to Glasgow Art School, so on, then went down to London. But whilst he was a student, he went to the Kelvin Grove Gallery in Glasgow. Some of us would know that, yeah. And in the Kelvin Grove Gallery, there is the big, beautiful Dali painting of the Jesus crucified figure. You might know it, where the cross is up there and it's kind of looking down upon the world. Maybe give me a wee hand to see if you do know it. Put up your hands if you do know the image. So it's St. John of the Cross, that's right. So when you go to Glasgow anyway, to the art gallery, the way that it is hung on the wall is it's in a niche. So what you have to do is, you come up the stairs, it's on the second floor, come up the stairs, and then you have to kind of like actually physically make yourself stand in front of it to see it. Yeah. And the first time that you see it, I mean, it's a huge painting. You know, it's probably most of that wall. It's a big painting. And the first time you see it, it's very impactful. It's obviously painted to have an impact, and it just hits you like bang. Okay. So Craigie Aitchison, anyway, as an art student, became kind of fascinated by this and had to keep going back again and again and again and again to just see this, just to see it. And as like he described it, to suck it in. It's quite a nice image, isn't it? To suck it in. So then he started to paint figures on crosses as a student. And his tutor said to him, "These are terrible. No one's going to buy these. They're too primitive." He said, "Too primitive, too basic." Well, there's that word again. We've been using that for the past 2 days. Basic, too basic. So then he just decided that he would continue to paint them and paint them and paint them and paint them. So he has got hundreds of these images of a crucified man. Okay, I've given you a wee bit of him. about these images is that they are really unusual in their starkness and simplicity. Very unusual. And he himself would not describe himself as a man of faith. So in other words, he would say he's a non-believer, doesn't believe in anything, which is another interesting aspect of this. And one of the things about them, again, is that they have a massive depth of colour in them, a tremendous depth of colour in them. And I'm sure you're dying to see one of them now, now that I've whetted your appetite. Yeah. And the big thing about them is that they connect emotionally for people very quickly because of their simplicity. Not particularly because it's an image of a crucified man, but because of their simplicity. And of course, it's this simplicity for us that's a way into prayer. Yeah. So here's an image I'm just inviting you to look at from Craigie Aitchison. If you can't see it, I'll move this. Yeah. And you can see in that one, it's really, really interesting. You can see in that one, there's a dog there. And the interesting thing about the dog is, well, we know the Passion narratives, don't we? I don't think there was a dog there in the story. Maybe there was, who knows? Yeah, but this is the way he imagines it. And you can see that in his, they are really radically simple. You can see that there's the whole thing about the darkness of the background and the hill. Okay. So, moving on a wee bit. This is an amazing one. You see it now, Jim? This is an amazing one. And this is a rather large image again. It's another image that's about that size. So, you know, like, the colours in this are extremely vibrant. And I've used these, you know, with people as a way into praying at the foot of the cross. Probably don't know they're praying at the foot of the cross, but they are, yeah. Okay. And look, there's the dog again. So just imagine that we've done some very basic training with prayer guides, and then we're going to try and explore imagery, because I think we could do this with all of our Passionist imagery. We've got a beautiful image up there, but it really doesn't become prayer until we've unpacked the symbols behind it and actually have sat in front of it and prayed with it. Yeah? So what might a prayer guide do with this image? Years ago, I used to do parish retreats, and we would have 5 nights where we'd be praying with icons. It was a really great way of getting to parents, you know. We would do one night on the Trinity, another night on the resurrection, another, and so on. You know, the mysteries of faith, basically. But unpacking them really through just gently exploring the imagery that is there. So the first thing that a prayer guide would probably do is to help the person gazing to notice. And here's another thing, Pope Francis often talks about the prayer of gazing, doesn't he? Have you noticed that? You've never noticed that? It constantly refers to this phrase of gazing, just gazing. So helping the person to gaze and to notice by gently unpacking. So for example, this is just illustrative practice here. The first thing to notice here is the presence of the dog. Not Jesus on the cross, but the presence of the dog. And as I said before, when we recall the Passion narratives, there is absolutely no mention of a dog. That's okay. So this must be symbolic. If there's no mention of a dog, it must be symbolic. And if you remember the image that was up yesterday, it was more realist, and therefore we were identifying characters and so on. So it must be symbolic. And this is it. The dog symbolizes loyalty and faithfulness. If anybody's had a dog, you know how loyal they are. Of course, that's because you're the source of their food, so they're very loyal. Yeah? They're very faithful. And these are the qualities of a disciple: loyalty and faithfulness. So it's you or me. We are the dog at the foot of the cross. It's you and me. Well, that's if you call yourself a disciple, and I'm sure you do. So, obviously the dove, there's a luminescence there in that dove. It's quite magnificent, really. But the dove hovering above symbolizes the Spirit. That's very obvious. The Spirit is present when Jesus is on the cross, and present in really every event in the life and death of Jesus. Ever present, always present. And the interesting thing about this figure and all of Craigie Aitchison's figures is that the figure on the cross is resting as if comfortable. Very comfortable. And again, there's a luminosity in the crucifix, a restfulness and a bright light. And the vivid colours of red and blue, they connect with blood and water. And so we're now getting to start to really connect with what this is about, this picture. And we can practice the prayer of just simply gazing and being here. And that's an easy way to pray. Now, you can do all sorts of things with this, but the unpacking of the symbols very gently and very simply is maybe a way into beginning to pray. And holds the attention so that you can just stay with it. You can just stay with it. So, it's a great image, isn't it? Do you like it? I love it. Maybe you hate it. I don't know, but I love it. But anyway, so we would hope that a trained prayer guide can move from exploring images to then listening maybe to a piece of scripture. So that's us now moved into an area where we've moved maybe, it's a bit like we've done a bit of reading of the picture, and we're now at the Lectio moment that you get in Lectio Divina, where we are actually listening to a piece of scripture out loud. Which would move then perhaps to responding in prayer, but that prayer might not need any words. That leads to a restfulness and a quietness, and we've called that contemplation. We have called that the final stage of Lectio Divina. And that's it. So, like, these kind of correlate with the 4 stages of Lectio Divina. Here's another image. You might be familiar with this artist, particularly if you're the northern part of Europe. Yeah? Anybody familiar with it?
Yes.
Yeah.
The author was a German Benedictine, Sieger Köder.
That's right, Sieger Köder. That's right. And so he has done lots of paintings of, a contemporary imagining of the Stations of the Cross, and he's done others as well, washing of the feet and so on. But often what we do in Catholic culture when we do the stations is we just go through them, end of, but we don't actually give people enough time to prayerfully reflect upon them. It's kind of over in a whiz. Yep. So what a prayer guide might do is to take a focus of a station one at a time over 14 weeks. And that's a prayer journey, rather than just go through them the way that we always do. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at this picture, you see it's quite an amazing picture. Because if you look at this picture, and in the center of it is the sun is being covered over, and there's somebody there with a hammer, a soldier. And you're the onlooker, are Jesus in this. Yeah. With the crowd aghast, looking on at you. So in fact, in this image, we become Jesus in this image when we start to reflect on it. And so what a prayer guide would do would be to enable people to notice this. And again, after unpacking the imagery and noticing and gazing, then moving on to connect to Scripture. And there might be some time then to reflect on how this connects with life and the crucified that are out there. And those crucified might even be us. Which after a moment of meditatio, which is reflecting on this and what this means for my life, then leading into some prayerful silence. And that's called Visio Divina. Yeah, Visio Divina, not Lectio Divina, because it's not book-based, it's based on visuals and imageries. There's another example. This is a fantastic, this is the same man. the way he images this. And there's something very emotive and modern about these images that speak directly to your gut and your feelings. And that's the point of them. That's the point of them. And of course, when Paul Francis was giving his input on Dominic Barbie, saying what Dominic was doing in his meditations was, he was saying, how do you feel? He wasn't saying, what do you think about this? And how do you think Jesus felt? Okay, so this image is an image that could enable groups to focus in on those who are carrying heavy crosses today. That's what a prayer guide could usefully do. And then just unpacking what's actually happening in this particular image. Again, leading into the supporting piece of scripture, which then links with the everyday life experiences of those who are being crucified today. So you can see that what I'm trying to do is to illustrate how this might be useful to us. And all of it is based on Lectio Divina, all of it. And in Lectio Divina, everything is leading to an encounter. It's not that everything's leading to the next stage, like an exercise in mechanics. You know, you start by reading, then you move on to reflect, then you respond, then you rest. These 4 hours, by the way, came from the Carmelite in Dublin, Christopher O'Donnell, you know, because they just correlate with the Latin words lectio, meditatio, ratio, contemplatio. Yeah? Read. But this is more accessible. Back to being accessible. This is more accessible for people because they say, what are those Latin words? Medi what? Yeah. So, reading, reflecting, responding and resting. And the image is used as a gateway into this, as a gateway into it. And Connor used the phrase before the coffee, framework. So it provides a framework for prayer, an easy way in. It can be used with groups, and once you've practiced it in a group, then you can begin to use it individually. And I think for us, the thing that is really important is honouring the 4 stages. We just touched on that a wee bit before the coffee. That often what people are calling Lectio is only a brief touch in to the first 2 stages, which is read and reflect. And the stage 3, respond and rest, is often very missing and shut down. And sometimes then it becomes a therapy group rather than a group that is about leading to something that's contemplative. So this should lead to the rest or the contemplation that Paul of the Cross spoke about often in his writings. You know that better than me, that he often talked about rest, didn't he? Now, that didn't mean lying down on the floor and having a sleep, didn't it? No. So, that leads to that rest and that time of quiet, contemplative experience. And that's what this is really about, that what we're trying to achieve here in this idea is that lay people can be trained to actually enable people to have experiences that are deep, that are contemplative, and there's a really easy way in. Yeah. Now, I think we've got loads of time, haven't we? Yeah. And I think that because it is practical, it's better that I don't talk. That perhaps maybe for about 15 minutes you go back into groups of 4 and you share on that. And it might be about like, what about the images and the way into images? Do you use them at all? Have you ever used them? Do you see the potential of image? And then that point that I'm trying to get across about what we should be doing as Passionists is leading this towards that rest that Paul of the Cross has spoken about and continues to speak about often in his writings. So I'm going to leave it over to you now for 15 minutes, and you do some sharing, and then we come back together.
Rest in the heart of God,
That's it.
in the sacred silence of faith and love. I think is the first quotation in the front of the little book that you got when you came here. So as Patricia said, we'll take 15 minutes in the little groups in the room you had earlier, and then after that we'll have a general time together.
And go for it, Aidan.
You talk about you bring people to the cross and you talk about read scripture.
Yeah.
Is there any particular advice you give about scripture? Is it about passion or something else?
No, well, I mean, keep that for after the 15 minutes, that question, okay?
Bring it first to your group,
That's right.
and then
okay.
we'll have it in the big room.
And then we can talk about